Study Session 7. Rational Statements and Arguments Involving Relations. Introduction. In this study session, we will discuss relational propositions. We will also examine the attributes of relations and how this information can be used to determine the validity or invalidity of arguments involving relational propositions. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Define and use correctly the term relational propositions. 2. Explain the different attributes of relation. 3. Determine the validity or invalidity of arguments involving relational propositions or statements. Relational propositions or statements. Relational propositions are propositions or statements that employ terms that express a relation. A term is said to express a relation if such a term requires more than one individual, object, or entity to make complete sense, though it is possible for an entity to express a relation to itself. The following are examples of words and phrases that express relations: father, brother, cousin, sister, married to, lover of, enemy, teacher, equal to, has the same weight as, bigger than, is the mate of, and richer than. A relational term may express a one-place relation, or it may be two-place, three-place, or four-place, depending on the number of individuals required for the sentence expressing the relation to make meaningful sense. For example, the proposition Adebayo is snub-nosed expresses a one-place relation, while the proposition Bello is the teacher of Ofo expresses a two-place relation because it requires two individuals to make complete sense. Propositions like Cameroon is between Nigeria and Ghana, and the landlord traded his house rent to the tenants for second-hand clothes express a three-place and four-place relation respectively. A proposition that expresses a one-place relation is said to be monadic. Bello 2000. Where a proposition expresses a relation between two or more entities, such a proposition is said to be polyadic. Bello 2000. If it expresses a two-place relation, it is binary, three-place, triadic, or four-place, tetradic. A polyadic relation also has a direction. It is either unidirectional and therefore irreversible, or bidirectional and reversible. An example of a unidirectional proposition is Bayo is the father of Bimpe. On the other hand, the proposition Babangida is the same age as Obasanjo is bidirectional. Attributes of relations. Attributes of relations help us to describe the way relational terms behave in propositions, and the way relational terms behave enables us to determine the validity or invalidity of arguments involving relational propositions. To properly understand the way relational terms behave, let us learn a little more about some attributes of relation. 1. A relation between two entities may be symmetrical, asymmetrical, or non-symmetrical. When a relation is symmetrical, it means that if one entity, A, has a relation to B, B must also have the same relation to A. For example, if a proposition says that Peter is married to Jane, it follows that Jane must be married to Peter. If a proposition also says that Peter is the same age as Andrew, it follows that Andrew must be the same age as Peter. On the other hand, when it is the case that an entity A has a relation to another B, but B cannot have the same relation to A, then such a relation is asymmetrical. If, for example, a proposition says that Peter is the father of Matthew, it follows that Matthew cannot at the same time have the relation of being father of to Peter. All such relations, as expressed by phrases like the husband of, is taller than, etc., are said to be asymmetrical. However, if the situation is such that an entity A has a relation to another B, but B may or may not have the same relation to A, then the relation is said to be non-symmetrical. For instance, if a person A is the brother of another person B, B may or may not be the brother of A. 2. Again, a relation may be transitive, intransitive, or non-transitive. A transitive relation is such that if an entity A has that relation to another B, and B has the same relation to yet another C, then A must have the same relation to C. The expression Andy is taller than John and John is taller than Patrick. Then Andy is taller than Patrick expresses a transitive relation. On the other hand, where an entity A has a relation to another B, and B has the same relation to C, but A cannot have the same relation to C, then the relation is intransitive. For example, a proposition like Ibadan is 5 miles to the south of Lagos, and Lagos is 5 miles to the south of Ijebu-Ode is intransitive. However, when a relation is such that if one thing A has that relation to another B, and B has the same relation to C, but A may or may not have the same relation to C, then the relation is said to be non-transitive. Examples of phrases that expresses non-transitive relations are friend of and enemy of. 3. Finally, a relation may either be reflexive, irreflexive, or non-reflexive. When a relation is reflexive, it means that a thing can have such a relation to itself. For example, it is possible for someone to be the same age as himself, or to have the same weight as himself. However, when it is not possible for an entity to have a particular relation to itself, that relation is said to be irreflexive. No one, for instance, can be said to be the father of himself or richer than himself. But when a relation is such that an individual entity may or may not have such a relation to himself or itself, then such a relation is said to be non-reflexive. For instance, somebody may or may not love or admire himself. A relational term may express all of the following relations, except A. Two-place relation, B. Three-place relation, C. No-place relation, D. Four-place relation. A relational term may express a one-place relation and more, depending on the individuals involved, but it can never express a no-place relation because there must be at least one person involved. Validity or invalidity of arguments involving relations. In study session 6, we learned how to test validity or invalidity of categorical syllogisms. Can you highlight the 3 ways that we used to test the validity of categorical syllogism? First, we can use the form of the categorical syllogism. Secondly, we can also use the Venn or Euler diagram. Thirdly, we can use the rules test. We have seen how relational terms behave in propositions. Therefore, when we are faced with the task of analyzing, that is, determining the validity or invalidity of arguments involving relational propositions, we have to be careful to remind ourselves of the following questions. 1. What is the relational term or terms involved in the argument? 2. What is the attributes or attributes of such term or terms? 3. Has the relational term behaved the way it ought to behave normally in the argument and under consideration? If the answer to question 3 above is yes, then the argument in question is valid. If no, then the argument is invalid. Consider the following argument. Francis is the same weight as Florence. Florence is the same weight as Messi. Therefore, Francis is the same weight as Messi. In this example, the relational term is has the same weight as. It is a transitive relation which says that if an entity A has a relation to another B, and B has the same relation to C, then A must have the same relation to C. The relational term in the argument has behaved to type, and the argument is therefore valid. Consider, however, this other argument. Adebanjo is taller than Sahid. Therefore, Sahid is taller than Adebanjo. In this second argument, the relational term taller than is asymmetrical. A relation is asymmetrical if it is such that if one entity, A, has that relation to another, B, B cannot have the same relation to A. In the above argument, however, the relational term is used as if it is symmetrical. In other words, the relational term taller than has not behaved in the usual manner in the argument under consideration. The argument is therefore invalid. What does it mean for a polyadic relation to be unidirectional or bidirectional? A unidirectional relation is an irreversible one, and as such, the relation only applies to one and not to be shared, while it is bidirectional if the relation is reversible and thus can be shared by the entities referred to. Study session summary. In this study session, you learned that relational propositions are statements which contain terms that express a relation. A term is said to express a relation if such a term requires more than one individual, object, or entity to make complete sense, though it is possible for an entity to express a relation to itself. When an argument contains relational propositions or statements, such an argument is called a relational argument. There are certain attributes of relations that help to describe the way relational terms should behave, and the way relational terms behave enables us to determine the validity or invalidity of arguments involving relational propositions. A relation can be 1. Symmetrical, asymmetrical, or non-symmetrical. 2. Transitive, intransitive, or non-transitive. And 3. Reflexive, irreflexive, or non-reflexive. That ends study session.